Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On. I'm Andy Milburn, and there's Dee Carcos.
Hello.
I told you I'd save you having to introduce yourself.
Thank you.
More importantly than either of us, we have a guest today, Dr. Joyce Karam, who is a senior news editor at Our Monitor, which is a major Middle East news agency outlet. And she also teaches at George Washington University. Joyce, great to have you on today. And so topic du jour is the Middle East. And I think we can all begin by saying this is a very uncertain time, as we have every single episode for the last 10 months. So what are your thoughts? What are the prospects of the peace in the Middle East? I never thought I'd actually be able to ask that question, but there you go.
No, Andy, great to be with you. I've been reporting on that region for over 2 decades, and I have to tell you, we've seen nothing like the last 10 months. The level of fragility, instability in the region is different. This time, the Gaza war, the conflict on both sides, Israel and Hamas, is more charged, has a global echo to it than other conflicts and wars we've covered in that region. Unfortunately, I wish I had good news for you on where the conflict is. It's nowhere good. We were a little bit more hopeful about a ceasefire maybe 3 months ago in June. Right now, it looks less likely. It seems both sides are dug in zero-sum game. The Israeli Prime Minister is determined on a mission to defeat Hamas. It's unclear what that means on the ground, because 10 months in, Hamas is still there. They're still calling the shots in Gaza. You've seen what happened with the 6 hostages that were killed by Hamas. We still have 97 hostages held in Gaza, but the prospects of a ceasefire are dim. U.S. officials are finally coming to that conclusion. So it's a matter in this time that each side is trying to buy between now and the U.S. elections, how each party can operate and achieve minimal goals until November 5.
What are the that's a very interesting point. So arguably Netanyahu stands to gain by waiting until the elections, hoping at the very least that the United States will be distracted, and at the best that whoever comes in will be a little more conciliatory towards what he wants. But what, we know that obviously, I mean, we talked about Netanyahu's motivation for that, but what are the sticking points? What kind of sense are you getting from the dynamics of the negotiations from both sides? What are the sticking points, and who is really blocking them?
Very good question. So over time, since these talks have been ongoing to try to get to a ceasefire agreements, there has been 3 major sticking points. One, who controls North Gaza? Can Hamas militants move back to the north That's something that the Israelis have given a hard no on, that this is non-negotiable. So that's one. The second that's more important now is who controls the 8-kilometer strip on the border with Egypt. It's known as the Philadelphia Corridor. The Israeli side, I mean, it depends who on the Israeli side, but they're saying, the prime minister is saying this has to continue to be ours because that route, they say, is used to move arms and weapons to Hamas. That's a hard no for the Egyptian side, because according to the Camp David agreement, 1978, that established peace between Egypt and Israel, this route, Israel has to be away from it. So that's the second point. The third one, and that's been consistent throughout the negotiations, is the swap between which Palestinian prisoners get released and which hostages get released. So the US had put out a plan, phase one, you have this number, and Palestinian prisoners that would be agreed upon that would be released. What we're hearing from the Israeli government now, what we're hearing from Netanyahu is some of the names on the Palestinian side, he doesn't want to budge on them. So these are the three main sticking points. Of course, there are other questions: who control Gaza? Would the Palestinian Authority be able to come back in? What happens to the Israeli troops in Gaza? But these are seen to be in phase 2 and 3 of any agreement. The 3 points I talked about, these are in phase 1, and there is no agreement about it.
Wow. So again, it's the it's who's released in return for the hostages, and the Philadelphia corridor itself are the two main sticking points. And I'm sorry, the first one.
Yeah, and the Philadelphia corridor, that becomes a bigger issue because you have Egypt involved.
Yeah.
Is Israel gonna risk the peace agreement, the first ever peace agreement it had with an Arab country, to control the Philadelphia? Here we're seeing divisions among Israeli officials. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, he's saying, hold on one second. Why? We don't need to control that route to block Hamas's weaponry. We can coordinate with other parties. But you have some say that Benjamin Netanyahu is actually using the Philadelphia corridor to block an agreement.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, just for the benefit of the listeners. So the Philadelphia corridor, as Joyce mentioned, is it's really on, almost on the border with Egypt. It's the kind of the southern boundary of Gaza. And the question, of course, long running kind of question between Egypt and Israel has been on the tunnels, so there was a school of thought within the Israeli military that you had to control the Philadelphia corridor in order to control the tunnels. However, a couple of things, and I think this explains the shift within the military and why Gallant is saying other things. The Israelis realized that there are other ways that they can control those tunnels. In fact, possibly a third of the tunnels are not even, they're not even under Israeli control now. And yet there are other ways, you find out where the entrances are, et cetera, number one. And sitting on the Philadelphia corridor makes them a target. That was Halevi, the chief of staff's kind of say, look, we're sitting here on ground, but the problem is underground. We have expertise, technology to pursue the problem underground. Let's not sit here on ground. And we're offending, the Egyptians at the same time. There's all kinds of reasons not to. But thirdly, perhaps the strongest argument, this isn't coming from outside, it's coming from within the Israeli military, and that is almost 100% of the munitions that they are finding now, have been finding in the last 2 months, were manufactured in Gaza. They were not brought in from outside. To include components, components from, so the point is that there are those within the US, within the Israelis, right, military, who are claiming that Netanyahu is making the Philadelphia corridor a blocking point when it should not be so.
And that's something, yeah, and that's something Bibi Netanyahu is very good at. I mean, this is a guy who is an expert at maneuvering US politics. He did it under Bill Clinton. He did it again under Barack Obama, under Trump even, and now with the Biden administration. He understands how to pull the levers. He goes to Congress when he's upset with the White House. He plays to the U.S. public when there's a message he wants to send out. We saw, he gave an interview to Fox just recently. He gave a press conference just to U.S. media just in the last few days. So he's a very shrewd operator when it comes to addressing a Western audience, and his ultimate game, and he's been successful at it, to stay in power. Right?
As a reminder, to perhaps some of our listeners didn't realize, Netanyahu kind of cut his teeth in debate in the U.S. on the TV circuit, in the 80s. Right, he became quite a popular figure. I mean, he's articulate. He's, he appears to be very bright, and he appeared, obviously, to have a grasp of the topic way beyond the American public. And so it appeared that he was explaining things that they didn't know while kind of presenting his view of the world.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is a guy, he's an MIT graduate, he spent time in Pennsylvania, and you don't have anybody from the other side.
No.
You don't have any, not even Palestinian, any Arab official that may be.
And that's what I was going to ask you about, Joyce. It's got to be supremely, I'm not talking about Hamas. I'm just talking about the Palestinian cause. Do you see anyone on the horizon at all? Abbas has lost, I think it's fair to say, all credibility with his people, and Hamas has led them down this path. But there is no one who has the charisma and the smarts, except for, and you're going to remind me of his name. He's in Israeli prison right now.
Marwan Barghouti.
But yeah.
Totally agreed. Abbas, he's 87 years old. He's viewed as corrupt. He's viewed as just somebody who's not championing the Palestinian cause. Mind you, this is a guy that came to power after the second Intifada, saying we have to pursue peaceful resistance. We have to
said what people
fight.
wanted to hear at the time, but did little to.
No, for sure. So he came with U.S. backing. He's close to Russia, and there were high hopes for him. But when it came to governance, when it came to establishing past agreements, implementing them with Israel, it was miserable failure for the Palestinian Authority. That's now, from all polls, is seen as very unpopular, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. Marwan Barghouti, the guy you mentioned, he's the most popular among the Palestinians, but there is very little chance that Israel would release him. He's charged with terrorism and is serving a jail sentence. You've had, of course, the former Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh. He was a little bit more popular than Yahya Sinwar, the current leader, but he was killed, as we know, in Tehran.
That's that's kind of ironic, isn't it, that we've talked about this, that the path of targeted assassinations sometimes leads you to a worse, often leads you to, we've seen that in the United States. And so now we're left with nothing but extremists, except for Marwan Barghouti, who is in jail. What is the Israelis? I get it, he's accused of terrorism, but so are they all. And in fact, the Israelis have released Palestinians with Israeli blood on their hands. So there is a precedent here. I'm going back to the release of prisoners. It seems now that this is maybe an arbitrary opposition to. You see what I'm saying? The Israelis they've already waived that concern about releasing Palestinians who killed Israelis. So now they have a chance to release someone at least who can provide more moderate leadership than Yahya Sinwar.
They have, but in this case particularly, I don't think they actually have a plan on what to do later. Their immediate plan is, we're gonna drive full force in Gaza. It's been 10 months. Hamas has not been completely defeated. So the only plan on the table is to just prolong the war. There is no day after plan on who takes control. Will it be the Palestinian Authority? Will it be a different offshoot of Hamas? Will it be an Arab force that comes to Gaza? So particularly because they don't have these plans in place and they have not made these decisions, it's hard to see them making the political decision of releasing Marwan Barghouti, because they would be just undermining the Palestinian Authority. He's more popular than Abbas, and then he would also be undermining Hamas in Gaza. So it's a little bit complicated at the moment in terms of seeing Barghouti out. I think the more immediate projection is, they're going to continue with this war until something happens within Israel or with the U.S. election on November 5.
In the meantime, what are some of the things that are happening? Some of the things that you're observing that are causing you concern? You mentioned activity in the West Bank, but on both sides, violence. Flaring violence on the West Bank. That's kind of being, I'm going to use the cliche, a simmering powder keg since 7 October. And now that there doesn't seem to be any prospect for a ceasefire, or if there is no prospect, do you see things getting worse there?
They are getting worse. We've seen at least three US citizens have been killed in the West Bank since October 7 by Israeli forces. We're seeing Israel launched an operation recently in the West Bank, in the Jenin camp, to just confront militants there. At the same time, we're seeing hundreds of Palestinians have been killed. Another issue that's a powder keg in the West Bank is settlers' violence. Settlements, for those who don't know, are illegal housing projects and units that Israel has established in the West Bank since 1967. It's illegal because it's an occupied territory. Just between October 7 and now, we've seen these settlers attacks go over 1,200 by the numbers I saw actually just a few days ago, 1,200 attacks by settlers against the Palestinians. So you're seeing, even between the settlers and the Palestinian population, a higher degree of animosity. Within the West Bank, there are more militant groups. There are people that are very upset with what's happening in Gaza, so they're protesting. But you're seeing also, like, a group, for example, its name is the Lion's Den. That's a fairly new group, and they're expanding. Hamas is gaining popularity in the West Bank as well. So can Israel handle a war in Gaza and an eruption in the West Bank? It's getting much more complicated to Israel, to the status agreements that were signed in Oslo and later on in the West Bank. So it's an important issue to monitor and to see how the Palestinian Authority as well can navigate this one.
Are we seeing Israelis move into areas that formerly were not administered by them within the West Bank? I mean,
Uh,
there's three categories of areas. In other words, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yes, so you're seeing more raids
Mm-hmm.
happening at night in Nablus, in Jenin, as I mentioned, and these are areas that we've seen more Palestinian autonomy around them after Oslo. But because of the situation, because where the Palestinian Authority is today, you're seeing Israel just move more aggressively within the West Bank. For me sitting here in Washington, I can tell you the administration, the State Department, the White House, they're worried if the Palestinian Authority can actually handle the situation in the West Bank. They're worried that a collapse of the Palestinian Authority could also mean a collapse of the security situation from the Palestinian side in the West Bank.
Yeah, just so very quickly. So after Oslo, all of the territory that had been captured by Israel in 1967 became subject to kind of a three categories. It's either security and administration provided by the Israelis. I think that's kind of whatever. It's like ABC, right? So either the
ABC, yes.
Israelis provide security administration, or B, the Israelis provide security, the Palestinians provide administration, or C, the Palestinians
Sure.
provide security administration. And the concern from the US perspective is that you were seeing more of the Israelis going into B and C areas on these raids. The areas A are those areas that are de facto, it's where settlements have sprung up and it's only Israelis. But as Joyce has said, even settlement, area A's are technically illegal, but they're just the fait accompli. So the Oslo Accords
I mean,
recognize that.
we're now 3 decades after Oslo. It's hard to see what's left from that agreement that
Yeah.
stands today. It's the areas you've mentioned, the A, B, and C, are very much just that status is no longer there, in part because militants have emerged, new militant organizations have emerged in the West Bank. Israel has moved in more aggressively. And the Area A that you mentioned, where the settlers are, we're seeing more clashes. These are coming sometimes into Palestinian areas. And there has been a push since October 7th to get the Palestinian population out of areas that are close to settlements. So we've seen some Palestinian, locals leave because of they're worried about settlers violence and attack. And this very much undercovered. I think few outlets did reports, MSNBC, CNN did reports about that. So it's really untenable when you're talking about the Palestinian-Israeli status quo. And Andy, here, I think it's really important because we forget sometimes that we haven't seen negotiations between Israelis and the Palestinians since 2013. And that's a major reason that we cannot overlook in how we got here. The Trump administration was the first administration in a long time that did not have the Israelis and the Palestinians talk and negotiate around the same table. The Biden administration tried to reverse some of the Trump administration decisions, but we still didn't see negotiations. And the failure of diplomacy, that's why we are where we are today. It's not just because, Hamas controls Gaza, of course.
Yeah.
That's another reason, but yeah, failure.
Yeah, there was no negotiation outlet. And arguably, the US kind of lost its way in negotiation stance. So it had always been the US stance for a two-state solution. And that, and to begin with that, and then to sort out the more tangled problems. The settlements is one. The right of return for Palestinian refugees potentially is another. But now it appears that the two-state solution is just hard. It's hard to imagine getting there from here. Two states living side by side, you know.
It looks like a mirage. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, if you look at that map, how do you even connect the West Bank to Gaza now? I mean, let alone how do you even connect the West Bank within itself? And then we have Jerusalem is another issue. We have the Jordan River. Israel wants control there. So we are in a really bad place in this conflict, and I don't say this lightly. And there is, I hope we can get to reassess, but the assumption that you could, overlook the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and just focus on outside agreements, that has fell flat on October 7. Of course, you can get an agreement with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates, normalization, but unless you address the elephant in the room that has been for 80 years now, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, there is no stability, long-term stability in the Middle East. You're seeing the Pentagon overstretched, sending aircraft carriers, reinforcing its presence in the Middle East
At the expense of the Pacific.
At the expense of
Ronald
the Pacific.
Reagan
Precisely.
carrier group.
And
yeah.
that's unsustainable. I mean, this is just not a good situation. The alternative would have been a more aggressive diplomatic push from the Obama administration going to the Trump administration. And maybe, we can dream that it would have been concluded in an agreement during the Biden administration. That didn't happen. Instead, we saw these elements of conflict spiral out of control, and that's why we are here today.
And in fairness to the US too, although we don't shy away from criticism. Arguably, with the death of Yitzhak Rabin, the anchor point for the peace, for the conciliatory movement disappeared within Israel. It took a while to become evident, and it was a process that began, back then in, what was it, 1995 or 96.
Yes.
Yeah. And arguably just and 7 October kind of completed that process of absolute polarization.
That's one way to look at it. The closest we've come to a deal was perhaps Camp David 2 in 1999-2000 with Bill Clinton. At the time, he actually ran out of time. He couldn't conclude the agreement. The Palestinians were divided among themselves within Fatah, and Arafat said at the time, he couldn't get the concessions he wanted on Jerusalem and the right of return. But after the 2000 talks, it's just been, Andy, just downhill from there. You saw the
That's right. Jerusalem was the other, the right of return, Jerusalem were two of the settlements, yeah.
Security.
And we haven't even got to there. It's like now for the Gaza piece, the real issue is what happens next within Gaza. And that isn't even up for discussion. Gosh, so it's painted a extremely gloomy picture, facts on the ground. So we haven't even talked about the North. Joyce, what are your thoughts about that? We talked about problems simmering on the West Bank in a way that perhaps they haven't previously. We've talked about the Lion's Den, right? Is that a Hamas-affiliated group, or are they independent?
They claim to be just their own Palestinian military.
But they have tremendous support on the West Bank. I mean, they seem to be.
They have support. They've claimed responsibility for more attacks and before October 7, even in the last year and a half. And just the situation just makes it for these groups to get popularity, because you have the Palestinian Authority that's just incapable of delivering to its people, and you have the Israeli occupation that keeps feeding into their ideology.
So what about up north? What are your thoughts?
Yes, that's another area that we haven't talked about yet. I was just in Lebanon in July, and at the time, it was the specter of war was high between Israel and Hezbollah. What we are seeing at the Lebanon-Israel border is an escalation that we haven't seen since 2000. So at that year, Israel withdrew from Lebanon unilaterally. There was no agreement. They withdrew. Dee, can I just mute my computer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll cut this.
2006.
It's muted for some reason, but it's okay. Hopefully it won't buzz again. I apologize.
That's all right. We didn't hear it.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Good. So 2006, we had the big war.
Yeah.
And the Israelis assumed then that Hezbollah will be contained. It was this, they call it mowing the lawn strategy, that they can come in every few years, or they can hit Hezbollah and they can just contain and deter the Iran-backed party in Lebanon. The problem is, 18 years since 2006, Hezbollah is much larger than it was. It has now presence in Syria, it has presence in Iraq, it has presence in Yemen. It rearmed and is very confident within Lebanon too, because it has a friendly government. There is no president in the country. So the situation is fragile, but we were able to avoid an all-out war a couple weeks ago when Hezbollah retaliated against Israel. Having said that, this situation is also unsustainable because you have the Israeli population in the north. They had to leave their towns. They had to leave their homes. You have a situation too in South Lebanon where displacement has happened. Schools are reopening in September. So can the US arrange a deal between Hezbollah and Israel, between Lebanon and Israel, that includes Hezbollah without a Gaza ceasefire? We're hearing more about this lately. Hopefully, if this happens, that problem will be at least contained until we see what happens in Gaza. The issue, of course, is Hezbollah has maintained that they will not stop their attacks until they see a Gaza ceasefire. So it depends what US negotiators can deliver on this issue.
Is there any, what are your thoughts about what's going through Nasrallah's mind? I mean, there's speculation about whether he is waiting for the go from Iran, whether he's an independent guy, but he's concerned about, I'll use a crude American expression. He's concerned about shitting in his own nest at this point in time, right? Always a concern for him, but he doesn't love Lebanon. He's not a Lebanese patriot. It's purely a utilitarian relationship, right? He needs a haven, and Lebanon is his haven. So what do you think? We'll pay you extra if you get this right. I mean, we'll pay you. I better shut up.
No, this is not. I mean,
but if you get this right, that's quite a.
Hassan Nasrallah is a very interesting guy. He is by far the most formidable leader of the group, and that's why it's sustained its.
Can you tell us a little bit about him? We use his name a lot, but
so
he's in a sense a different. I'm not talking about ethically. I'm talking about like his penchant, his charisma, his quality as a leader.
So I can tell you, as an Arabic speaker, as somebody who listens to his speeches, his Arabic is formidable. As an orator, as somebody from that region. When you look at other leaders, when you look even at Hamas militant or officials, there is nobody that excels in delivery of the Arabic language like Hassan Nasrallah does today. Of course, that doesn't negate the fact that his calculus is just independent of what happens to Lebanon. He dragged the country to a war that destroyed much of the Lebanese infrastructure after it was rebuilt after the civil war there. He admittedly says, we get our money, we get our food, he said in his speech, we get our water from Iran. So you want to come at us with the Iran thing? We welcome it. He says he does his decision independently. I'm not so sure because it seems since October 7, Iran has been reluctant to wage a full front war against Israel. And we've seen Hezbollah stage attacks against Israel, but those have been contained. Even when Hezbollah lost, Nasrallah himself lost close friend of his, Fuad Shukr, the head of the missile production in the party. The response was you know, I mean, sure, Israel downed many of the drones, but it could have been more. There was no border infiltration.
No red line. No red line crossed.
Exactly. So
this
is a very calculated guy, and I think at this point in time, his priority is maintaining the power he has in Lebanon. That's their base, and he seems to be enjoying, you know, having larger influence, Captagon, trade in Syria, having presence in Iraq, Yemen, as we mentioned. So
very interesting. So they've got disrupting their revenue stream would be another possible consequence of going to war. Again, Nasrallah points to Nasrallah as being a pragmatist, and the fact that he is adhering to the rules of the game that both Hezbollah and the Israelis talk about, right? Without talking about to each other, they both understand the rules of the game. It's, you know, you start off by hitting in the vicinity of what's that area called? Shabar Farms, you know, what happens in Shabar Farms doesn't, and then as long as it doesn't go south, and then, you know, the next step is as long as it doesn't go north of the Litani River for the Israeli strikes, for the, and for Hezbollah, interestingly enough, the red line, they've worked out Israeli red lines. Don't go off to Tel Aviv, right? You know, if you go off to Tel Aviv like that, now you're in their face. Now you, but
don't kill too many people.
Yeah, focus on mostly military targets, et cetera, and you keep the pot simmering and you keep the support coming without escalating into regional conflict.
And that's more of a Bibi Netanyahu also calculus here, because ahead of the Hezbollah retaliation for the assassination of Shukr, some in the Israeli military advised to hit Beirut, to hit Hezbollah headquarters as a preemptive move. And from the reporting that we've done, that others have done, it was Bibi Netanyahu that said, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to see what they do. We have
very interesting
US carriers. We have US intelligence helping us. And then we would fend off that retaliation instead of doing a preemptive strike. So in a way, a full-blown war is not in the interest of Hezbollah nor Israel at the moment. Could this change? Could there be a miscalculation? Of course. But Andy, at this point, I think it's not in their interest.
What about Iran?
Yes. So we're still waiting for that Iranian response to Haniyeh's killing, right? So as we wait, it seems the Iranians also don't want to go in a full front war. There is a lot happening in Iran internally. As we know, you know, their president was killed in a plane crash. The foreign minister was in the same plane as well. Their economy is not doing well. So there is so much change within Iran for a new leadership to establish itself, and then they will see what comes with their foreign policy. They seem also to be more focused on their nuclear program. They're advancing that. They're enriching more. So if you ask me, and that's pure opinion, their biggest retaliation would be, coming closer to a
breakout.
Yeah, exactly. Than anything they would do in, like firing missiles or other sort of attack against Israel.
And by the way, Western, the nuclear watchdog agencies, and the what's it called? The UN. It doesn't matter. The new UN nuclear monitoring.
Yeah.
And other experts. So together they estimate worst case scenario that Iran is 6 months from breakout. By that I mean developing enough enriched uranium to manufacture a weapon. Now you still have to weaponize it. It could take 2 years beyond that, to put it on or longer to actually weaponize that. But that's worst case scenario. Other estimates have it, a couple of years from breakout, or and then you add a few years onto then. But the problem is that there is no one can see an obstacle to prevent the Iranians from doing this. Is that correct? I mean, short of all-out war, no one can think of any diplomatic tools or any other means to prevent them from having enough enriched uranium, if that's what they want to do. Now, they, at the same time, are aware that once they do decide to break out, the West will find out. And that's, and they've crossed the red line too. So there's this delicate balance. Is that a fair way to put it?
You've put it much better than I would do. I'm not a nuclear expert, but even within estimates that you hear from regional countries, sometimes you hear from Israelis that period is shorter than 6 months.
Yeah, I've heard. Yes, the Israelis are very. So I'm trying to err on the side of conservative estimates, but you're right.
And we had, until 2018, you had an agreement that was not perfect, but that capped that program, the JCPOA. The U.S. withdrew from that agreement under Trump, and now most of the clauses in the agreement are about to expire anyway, so you can't return to that. The conversation will have to, again, come to November. Who wins the White House? What kind of a new nuclear deal you can reach with the Iranians? Can you tempt them into accepting a deal that would give them sanction relief, would give them more financial incentives than going for a nuclear weapon? Perhaps, but that has to wait for the new administration to come into office. There is no time and there is no room at the moment for negotiations. The Europeans have been trying to be a back channel in sending messages, the Swiss, particularly the Omanis, to at least contain the nuclear program, but it's not in a good place. The bigger question as well, Andy, is would Israel go unilaterally for a strike? Do they have the weaponry to do it, the sort of bombers that you know more about than me to do that? Would they inform the U.S.? Would they not? That's a big one. And
we in the U.S. military have lived with that prospect, as you know, and a lot of what I did personally in the military was to try and avert that happening, to offer other alternatives or to bring military pressure on Iran below the level of armed conflict, or bring pressure on Iran below the level of armed conflict to alter course, but at the same time persuading the Israelis that this would be a disastrous move, and that the U.S. would guarantee Israel's security, but the implicit return on that is that Israel would not attack Iran. You know, my policy viewpoint of that is, I think, is that it's remained the same. You know, that is the policy, is the U.S. is at all costs we're trying to prevent that happening. At the same time, U.S. does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So walking that line has been is what continues to happen. I have tremendous, you know, you're there in the Pentagon far more often than I am right now. What is your kind of feeling about you know, the political part aside, about handling Iran? Do you get the feel that there are lines of communication for negotiation, or has Iran kind of turned off the phone and said, okay, we're going to get our head down and in our own business for a while and let you worry about what we're doing?
So good news, they haven't turned off the phone, they haven't turned off communications despite the escalation around the Gaza war. We've seen at least 2 meetings, not direct, indirect, between US officials that went to Oman, the small country in the Gulf, and Iranian officials came, and the Omanis were mediating. That was purely about the nuclear issue. The Pentagon, and rightly so, they're very concerned that the aftermath of the Gaza war is dragging the U.S. deeper into the Middle East. It's diverting resources, and it's a big burden on the strategy. I mean, this is Secretary Austin didn't come to office wanting to spend most of his resources in the Middle East. As you mentioned, there is the Asia Pacific. There are other challenges between, Russia, Ukraine, that the U.S. would rather spend more of its assets there. So in that sense, the priority is now to contain the situation, to still act as a deterrence, but we need a ceasefire in Gaza, because absent of that, it's hard to contain the other side. It's hard to get to a situation of at least cold peace between Iran and its proxies, especially the Houthis. I mean, this is a group that's very helpful for Iran in the
and is disrupting the global economy right now. All things mitigate for, absolutely the U.S. interests are for there to be a ceasefire. I would say, there's the U.S. interests, absolutely. It's very interesting to hear also what Netanyahu is saying, because I've heard this among some, number of right-wing Israelis. A couple of things. One is, two-state solution is off the table. This is the concerning thing about this, though, Joyce, is it's not just right-wing Israelis. That's like most Israelis since 7 October, and Netanyahu's kind of embodying that fear and emphasizing it. But the other piece is that there is this kind of attempt to continuously deconstruct what's happening in Gaza from the threat up north on Netanyahu's side. Hey, these are 2 separate issues. The Palestinian issue is separate from Hezbollah. Hezbollah is an existential issue. You shouldn't tie them together. Whereas Israel's adversaries are making it clear, no, we see these as very much tied. And that's presenting a negotiation, a problem for the United States, right? Because now there's a clear possible divergence between U.S. interests, regional stability, and Israeli interests, or Netanyahu's interests in particular.
And for
not Israeli interests, but a faction. A faction.
I think for the first time in this conflict, when you talk about non-state actors in the Middle East, you're seeing a multi-front war against Israel. These are separate fronts. So we've talked about Lebanon, we've talked about Gaza, of course, but you're also, Yemen, Iraq, Iraq through Syria. So this is new in this conflict. I mean, of course, you had the Fidaiyin, the PLO fighters back in the 70s and the 80s, but it was nothing like this. You've had state actors fight Israel, 1973, 1967. This is different, and this is a challenge for Israel, how it addresses different threats. But on the two-state solution, yes, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptic about it. But the main argument for it still is, what is the alternative?
Yeah.
What I mean, are we going with John Bolton, the three-state solution? That's a joke.
Yeah, that's
Gaza to Egypt and West Bank to Jordan. That's just not one state. More so after October 7, the Israelis would not want a one state. Do you prolong the occupation, the status quo? Those don't end well, in history. So this is just there is no alternative. The two-state solution is still the strongest argument on the table. How do we get there has always been
because ignoring the problem arguably has got us, by us I mean collectively, in the position where we are now.
Yes.
Right. You pointed out no negotiations for 9 years. And yet in the meantime, several operations that took place in Gaza, and life continued, and everyone thought that the problem had gone away.
And this is where the U.S. Congress is also liable for this one, because for the longest time they allowed themselves to be used by Benjamin Netanyahu as to exert pressure on any president who's in office, and that came at the expense of U.S. national interest, which is to achieve a two-state solution, which is to proceed with negotiations. This is not sustainable.
I mean, if I was, we weren't hoping for a solution necessarily to this, but Joyce, we're very disappointed you didn't give us one.
I know. We'll have to do it again.
Is there anything, this has been terrific, is there anything else that we haven't talked about, anything we've talked about that you'd like to mention?
I mean, just to end it on a hopeful note, you talk to Palestinians and Israelis, and there are people on both sides who want this to end. There are figures in Israeli and Palestinian politics. There was a paper by former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and a Palestinian negotiator Nasser Qudwa just in the last few days proposing a solution. So there are voices that can still get us out of this chaos that we're in, this bloodbath.
They've got to rise above the anger. Right?
Yes, exactly. And you have to create the political climate that would get us there. And I personally believe this region is meant for coexistence. It's been the case in the past. It can be the case in the future. It's just we really need to do diplomacy better as Americans, as U.S. administration, and I don't know. We can only hope for better days ahead, Andy.
Well, Joyce, on that less than happy note, but absolutely honest, fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. And yes, we will definitely get you back. Hopefully to analyze things as they get better.
Let's hope so. Thank you.
Yeah. In the meantime, please tell everyone that you're going to appear on Eyes On. Everyone will be terribly impressed on Monday, and I'm looking forward to it. This was a great episode. D, oh yeah, and Joyce, so you can be found at George Washington University, and also Our Monitor, where you were the
Yes.
senior news editor. I'm not telling you that as though you don't know it. I'm telling everyone else. And D, over to you for closing comments.
Yeah, so all of Joyce's links will be in the description down below in the show notes. So take a look there. She's on Twitter, at Joyce_Karam. Great Twitter feed. She's very much plugged into the Middle East. It's a great follow. And yeah, for us, Andy's info is down in the description, his Substack, everything you need to know, his amazing book. I have to say that every episode.
I pay you to that. One day you'll read it.
I did read it, actually. It's one of the only books I've ever read.
Awesome.
And
I
of course,
remember what color it was.
the best way to support the show is patreon.com/theteamhouse. All the information is down in the description. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much.